Hey guys, welcome back to the On Throttle channel. Today I'm going to cover off my thoughts on the upgraded suspension that I've got on my CRF250 Rally, as it's a topic I've been getting asked a decent amount about on social media and here. Keep in mind this will also apply a lot to the CRF300 and 300 Rally, as the bikes have got a very similar suspension setup, and the guys who did my suspension, Moto SR and Taupo, they are basically the #1 place in New Zealand to get this done if you are a Kiwi. Before we get into it, if you found any of my content half decent, I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider subscribing. Seeing that sub number go up is one of the things that really pushes me to produce more content on the regular, and I kind of need all the inspo I can get, being the constantly tired owner of 2 kids under 4. So earlier this year I finally ticked off upgrading the suspension on the Rally, which is something I knew I wanted to do before I even bought the bike back in 2019. If you're watching this, which you obviously are, you're probably interested in what it's like getting a CRF250 or 300's factory suspension sorted out. I'm going to do the best I can to explain not only what was done, but how it feels now the bike is actually set up for my weight. Now, I'm not going to go into pricing. Sorry if you want to know how much I paid for the transformation, but it is, not hugely relevant, I don't think. Especially with the constant rising costs everywhere. Everything's going more expensive at the moment because of inflation, global events, COVID, yada yada. So, we're not going to talk about pricing, but it was over $1,000 New Zealand to get done, and it was well worth every cent. Anyway, instead of going down the usual route of a Racetech fork spring upgrade and a YSS shock, which is so popular with these bikes, I instead trusted the bike to Kiwi suspension experts Moto SR and Taupo, and had Scotty Brooker and his team work their magic on the bike. What they did is pretty much witchcraft to me, and I don't even pretend to understand the intricacies of what they did to the bike, but here's what I've managed to wrap my head around. So, Moto SR is one of the only outfits I know that are willing to put the effort into not only throwing new springs on, but also revalving both ends of the CRF250L and 300s. That includes the so-called non-serviceable factory shock absorber, which, while it's not got the adjustment of a complete aftermarket unit, probably has benefited the most from the Moto SR magic. Physical components are a set of K-Tex springs, with my understanding being that the spring for the fork is a direct replacement for the factory unit and retains the bike's separate function fork design. That means dampening is taken control of in one side of the fork, while the springs are in the other. The real magic, I'm told, comes from the revalve. With Moto SR owner Scotty being an old hand at suspension tuning, this is where my hard-earned dollars really got spent. A spring is a spring, he told me. The real work is in the revalve. If I'm honest, I'm willing to believe it, because the result is a completely transformed bike. Before I took the bike down to Moto SR, I was asked a series of questions so the team could set the bike up for me properly. That included the likes of my weight. I'm thoroughly overweight at 106 kilos, and whether I carried luggage regularly and how much it weighed. At this point, it was already decided that due to my budget, the factory rear shock would stay in place, as a replacement would nearly double the financial outlay. The theme of this bike, as always, has been keeping the budget low. It is about getting out there and doing stuff, not spending big dollars on bling. So, as you may have seen in previous videos, I dropped the bike off as a whole unit and let the Moto SR guys do their thing over a few days. As you can see in the initial video, after getting the bike back, it literally blew my mind, and all I could initially bring myself to say was, wow. But after that initial ride is when I've really come to appreciate the difference going through the expense of upgrading the suspension with a pro, and what it really means to me as the owner and rider of this bike. So since then I've done some decent riding, including plenty of road and the 42 Traverse in the Central Plateau, and I think it's safe to say the performance of the bike is much better for it all. Not only does it track better on the road, off the road it is so much more controllable, and I feel like I'm not getting beaten up by the bike. Hell, most importantly, it's way more fun to ride. Riding the same trail a little over a year ago, the bike bottomed out constantly, and if I hit a jump or crested a rise with a bit of spirit, the rear end shot up and tried to slap me in the ass. Nothing I did in terms of rider input, other than slowing down of course, could alleviate this on the factory suspension. It was the biggest thing holding me back from progressing my off-road riding skills, and while I'd heard spending the money and getting new springs my weight would help, the expense always meant this was way down the list of mods. Now post upgrade, it is almost a completely different bike. Okay, it's still heavy and underpowered, as a Honda L model technically tends to be, but it feels like such a more planted platform, and it's hard to believe I wallowed around on the factory suspension for 3 whole years. The bike not only tracks well and goes everywhere I want it to go, even in the rough stuff, the bike responds to inputs now, and that's the biggest change. It's almost like riding a mountain bike in terms of how it feels. Something that struck me between the 2 rides on the 42 Traverse was being told to bounce the front before an obstacle to unload that suspension and help the bike glide over. My understanding was that the lighter weight on the front end would help the bike glide over the obstacle without smashing through the suspension stroke. Now, since having the suspension done, the bike actually does this. I can use my weight to bounce the bike, and I can almost wheelie it in first and second gear now, which is a huge thing because I've still got the factory gearing and I'm a fat ass. But in terms of how the bike responds as well, so as you've seen in earlier clips of this vid, I can jump the bike now, and while it still will find the bottom of its suspension stroke, nothing's going to change that. The response I get from the bike now, instead of just slamming down onto its bump stops and sort of sitting there, it now comfortably bounces back and rebounds. I can hit a jump and not have the front end just compress. It's really hard to sort of think about, but essentially the bike feels like a proper dirt bike now. And while there have been a couple of drawbacks to having the stiffer springs installed, like rider comfort over a long distance is not as good as it was, and it wasn't great before, I'm more than happy to have a slightly more sore bum for the amount of control I now have over the bike. It's mind-blowing, really. And unless you experience it for yourself, you're not going to really appreciate it until you spend the money. And this is the first time I've ever actually spent any money on suspension tuning any of my bikes. And honestly, I wish I'd done it sooner. I wish I'd had the money way back when I first bought the bike to get this sorted. But now it's done, I am thoroughly thrilled with it. And it basically means that I'm going to have a lot more time with the Rally, so long as I don't crash it and ruin it, than I previously expected, because I was getting to the point where the bike was limiting me as a rider. Now the bike has gone that extra step up. I can continue to enjoy it, to improve my skills, and just enjoy getting out riding, which is the whole idea of owning a motorcycle. So, yep, it was over $1,000 to get done, but was it worth it? Hell yes. And while I can't compare this to what it's like to have that extra Racetech fork spring in the dampening side of the fork, just getting it done by a professional means I am confident in how the bike has been set up. There's no sort of ifs or buts or did I do this right. It was well worth it. I can thoroughly recommend it. And if you've got a CRF250L or 300L or any of the Rally variants, seriously consider not only getting your springs done, but also get a revalve done on both ends, if you're not, especially if you're not replacing your rear shock. For me, picking up the bike and seeing the fact that it doesn't just sag horrendously under its own weight is almost enough to go, wow, I spent my money well here. Getting on the bike, it's a little bit taller than it used to be, but it is so much better. It's hard to believe. There are still a few mods to go I've decided that I want to do, but when it comes to prioritizing mods on your Honda CRF Rally or L, suspension, it needs to be up there. You can bimble along for a few years if you really don't have the money, but once you spend that money on the suspension upgrade, it is a completely transformed bike, and it is so much more capable for it. If you want to know more about the upgrade, head over to the Moto SR YouTube channel or check them out, motosr.co.nz. The guys there, absolute pros to deal with. They pulled the suspension, put it all together. They even re-greased my linkage for me on my rear end, so I am utterly thrilled with that. And just the communication and customer service was second to none. It's the kind of experience I wish you saw more of in the New Zealand motorcycle industry. So big thanks to Scotty and the team at Moto SR. For me now, it is the next thing to do on the bike is I'm getting some new tyres in the near future, as well as a bash plate, because I was starting to find that even with the suspension fully upgraded, I was getting a few knocks to that lower plastic skid guard on the Rally, and it's finally time to sort that out. So next video, hopefully, we'll be doing something along those lines. Till then, thanks for watching, and I hope this has been of some use to you, this long ramble about how amazing it is to get your suspension sorted, because, let's face it, it is amazing.